What do you think is the most underappreciated part of the spirit making process?
There's a lot that's known about processing. What's less understood, the influence of terroir or the location of that distillery. You could have exactly the same distillery and you could lift that whole distillery up and move it and put it into a different location, a different geography. And what you would find is it would be a completely different spirit character, even though the process was essentially the same.
I would have to say that one of the most underappreciated parts of the spirits production process would have to be mashing.
And how you're really being conscious about temperatures and looking at your mashing process.
Distilling gets a ton of credit. It looks very romantic, lots of swirling glasses and serious, thoughtful looks at the spirit safe, and the heads, hearts, and tails cuts, and all that stuff is important, of course. But mashing is actually where a lot of that flavor gets set up and has a really big impact on the flavor and character of the eventual spirit.
What temperature are you entering your different grains? How are you cleaning after you do that? Because that's where you can introduce bacteria into your production. And if you don't pay attention to those things, you're going to see that you get contamination, which leads to off notes.
Things like the turbidity of the wort, how clear or cloudy it is, and the temperature of your third or fourth runnings make a huge impact on every distillery's house style.
It's not so glamorous looking at your mashing process and hygiene when you're doing that, but it's really, really vital.
I think the most unappreciated one is yeast. Yeast is the heartbeat.
In the spirit making process, I think the most underrated part of it is the fermentation stage.
Two things. The first one, fermentation.
Fermentation doesn't go right, everything else is lost, right? Because that's where you draw a lot of your flavors in.
I think fermentation is simply viewed by some people as a little bit of a commodity and it gets kind of overlooked. But of course, the fermentation is where all of this complex biochemistry goes on.
The way you ferment, the big vessel you use for fermentation, and the yeast that you're choosing, wild yeast, natural yeast.
And the thing is, it provides most of the flavor, at least 40% of what you're making.
And the yeast produces a whole range of wonderful flavors, not just the alcohol.
Yeast that you prepare or yeast that you purchase, and that's the length of fermentation, the type of environment for your fermentation. That defines a lot of elements in taste. Never underrate this. This is crucial.
I got original yeast strains from the Wisers and Gooderham and Warts and Hiram Walker and frozen lyophilized cultures. I'd love to see what whiskey would have tasted like during the heyday of Canadian whiskeys.
The second aspect that I think is underrated, and maybe I say this because I also have a training as a master blender, is the way you blend.
I think some elements which people don't see behind the scenes at the distillery would be the amount of work we do with regards procuring our casks, dealing with certain cask suppliers, and also the work we do on our studies for sustainability as we use wooden barrels.
Blending is crucial as well because you are marrying elements. And some people think, oh, it's going to average things out. No, a great blend is an act of creation, and you can actually make beautiful, beautiful things by mastering blending. And the only downside to this, it is soft knowledge and it takes many, many years of experience.
One thing that most people don't really understand is attention to detail, I think, is the most important part of the process. You have to be focused on everything and you can't just let anything slide. And I think that's important if you're developing a new product and to gain that consistency of continuing to make the product.
The other side of it as well is what people don't see is the amount of people involved in making whiskey, that we would actually have a dedicated lab just from a quality control point of view, which is a team of people. There are people that you would never see at whiskey events or any kind of whiskey launches, and they're, a lot of the backbone of what we do to make sure that everything we do is to the best quality that we can possibly do.